Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to answer some of the questions that I've been receiving, especially when it comes to things like 5-star limited characters, and specifically, their dupes. It turns out that, dupes in a game like Wuthering Waves are a pretty important topic, especially for low spenders and sometimes even free-to-plays and, obviously whales, because of the fact that you can do this in this game. Pretty much every character in Wuthering Waves, when they're on banner, you can simply go ahead and go to item exchange in the shop and do something a little crazy. You can go ahead and you can purchase a dupe, up to 2 of them in the shop. And so what I wanted to do today was get into which dupes, specifically their S1 and S2 upgrades, are the most valuable for, well, all of the limited characters on the roster. I've got all of them down here. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna rank all of these characters by order that they released in the game, much like some of the other tier lists that I've made in the past. And we're gonna be incorporating a lot of different elements into it. What it does to their overall power, what it does to their quality of life, and honestly, whether or not they're actually worth it in overall gameplay. And so this list isn't going to be too long because, ladies and gentlemen, Wuthering Waves only has about 10 limited characters thus far. We won't be going over the standards because you'll get them over time. So let's go ahead and get right on into it, starting off with Jiyan. So, when it comes to Jiyan, I'm going to be honest about a couple of things. His S1 is easily one of the worst upgrades in the game in terms of power. It gives him a second cast of his resonance skill, and it also reduces the forte charge cost of doing an enhanced version of his skill. This would have been interesting if he had to use this resource resolve when he was casting it at most situations, but during his resonance liberation, there is no resolve cost for the ability to get the buffed version. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that this basically just gives you a little bit extra ER, but it only gives you that extra ER if you're constantly casting the ability. What this kind of means is that you can go from 125 to 125% minimum ER to maybe 115, 110 if you're spamming the ability across your rotations. It doesn't actually improve your damage, and in some team comps, using this ability completely can actually lower some of your overall DPS. And so oftentimes, I won't even make use of this S1 during my rotations with him, because it's really not that good. Second, after casting intro skill, Jiyan gains 30 extra resolve on his forte circuit, and his attack is increased by 28% for 15 seconds. It has a 15-second cooldown. The first part of the ability that gains extra forte circuit when he intros in, it's almost completely useless because 90% of the time, you're just going to use your liberation after an intro skill. And so what that means is that that's the same exact playstyle that you would use at S0. You're never going to intro skill, plunge, skill twice, and then liberation because that's usually a DPS loss in your rotations. And so what ends up happening is that this entire part over here does nothing. And your attack is only increased by 28% for 15 seconds. You're spending an entire dupe for the equivalent of like 3 substats. He's C tier. He's C tier for his first 2 dupes. The reason why getting dupes in him is sort of okay is only because of his S3. That gives him a massive crit rate boost and a massive crit damage boost. And this is when Jiyan actually starts getting useful on the sequence node side. His first 2 dupes, however, they're some of the worst in the game. And considering that he was the first limited character released, I honestly think it was a bit of a miss on Kuro's part to make his dupes this fucking bad. And so with that, Jiyan is, ladies and gentlemen, he's going into the C tier for his S1 and his S2 because they are quite literally one of the worst things in the game. His S1 is just ER. His S2 is 3 attack substats. And when you compare that to a lot of the other characters that I'm going to be showing you all today, this is some hot doo-doo water. It's actually trash. I feel like some standard characters have better sequence nodes than he does for the first 2. Next up, we're going to be having Yinlin. So let's put her on deck and I'll pull her up on my screen. All right, for Yinlin, her first S1 is going to be focused on a bit of a damage increase. Her resonance skill, the first and second cast, will deal 70% more damage. This ability deals no damage. It's at level 9, and it does this much damage. 55.47 times 3, and 83.2 times 4. There's really not a point in Yinlin's S1, because you're increasing damage by 70% on an ability that does no damage in the first place. Doubling 0 is still 0. And while these values on the side over here might not actually be 0, they're still incredibly low. And you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen? This means that you're not getting a lot of value out of this. You're not getting very much value at at all. And so let's be honest here. Yinlin's not looking in a great spot either when it comes to this tier list. Let's go ahead and take a look at her S2 and see if it brings it up. Her resonance skill, Electromagnetic Blast, right? It recovers an additional 5 judgment points and 5 resonance energy on hit. This does let her charge her Forte Circuit faster, but this is the thing. It's not by very much more. You are, in a sense, spending an entire dupe to deal no additional damage at all and basically just increase her Forte Circuit charge and how much resonance energy she's getting. Her first dupe focuses on dealing more damage for an ability that does no damage in the first place, and her second dupe focuses on increasing her rotation time. This is very low power. This is basically saving you 1 to 2, maybe 3 seconds on your rotation, depending on the number of enemies, or a whole dupe, potentially 160 pulls, or 360 corals, 45 pulls from the coral shop. All of these different resources are being used to slightly increase your rotation time and reduce your ER requirements. That's not good. That's bad. And frankly, I think it's worse than Jiyan's. I actually think it is worse than Jiyan's because of the fact that the damage boosts are worse than his, and his are frankly awful. And so because of that, saving 2 to 3 seconds on your rotation for a whole dupe that you could be using to pull another character, or corals that you could be using on any other character's dupes, that's not really that great, guys. And as you can see over here, the 1.0 characters, they don't really have great dupes at all. And it's a bit of a shame. And as you'll see from some of the future character releases, the devs did in fact decide to make the starting dupes a lot stronger. So next up, we're gonna have the character that's currently on banner. We've got Jinhsi. Jinhsi, in my opinion, has the best S1 in the game. She has, without a doubt, probably the best S1 in the game from a damage perspective. And the reason why Jinhsi has this is that she gains up to 4 stacks of a 20% damage buff for her enhanced resonance skill, Nuke. That is an 80% damage bonus on her skill, which is her main source of damage for one dupe. This is so much stronger than all of the previous upgrades that we've seen, and it's so much stronger than, honestly, a lot of the future upgrades for characters. It's literally 80% damage on what is a majority of her damage in her rotations. And it just gets to a point where you read this and you're just like, what's going on? Why is it so strong? And then you realize why this sequence node is so strong. And that's because her second sucks fucking ass. Her second is fucking awful. This might be legitimately one of the worst sequence nodes in the game. Her S1 is great, but her S2 is like, what is this thing? I would highly recommend, if you're pulling Jinhsi, if you want her dupes, unless you're gonna go to S3 and gain this buff on intro skill, don't even get S2. Do not get it. Do not get her S2, because the only thing this is useful for is overworld farming. It is to farm enemies faster. And if you're looking to pull a character dupe just to farm enemies faster, just pull Roccia. You'll farm faster than Jinhsi's S2, and you'll get a new character. But if you're stopping at this, it is an awful fucking idea. It is one of the worst ideas you could ever have. Because when you read this at first, you would think, oh, this means that I don't need somebody with coordinated attacks to charge Jinhsi's Forte Circuit anymore. But the truth of the matter is that all this does is it lets you, in the Tower of Adversity or hologram bosses, any endgame mode, you get one fully enhanced Forte charge at the start of combat, and then this sequence node does nothing for the rest of the clear. And if you've seen a typical Jinhsi rotation, your first skill is always unbuffed and never has anything up for it. And so you increase your damage by like maybe 70k. That is all this sequence node does. And when Jinhsi is with S1 critting for maybe 400 is 500k on her enhanced skill, which she uses 3 to 4 times a clear, this thing is almost useless. I'm actually going to put her at A for now because we are judging this by S1s and S2s, and her S1 is strong, but her S2 literally doesn't do anything outside of overworld farming. And so I'll put her in A for now, and then maybe we can adjust some of the rankings later. All right, next is my personal favorite character, Changli. And ladies and gentlemen, I've got some things to say for you. Changli's S1, it increases the damage of her Forte Circuit and her entire resonance skill by 10%. Guys, as we just saw earlier, Jinhsi's was 80% and this is 10%. You don't need to be exceptional at math to know the difference. This is one of the worst sequence nodes in the game. Honestly, the damage increase is so low, I could in some situations actually say it's worse than Jiyan's. because at least Jiyan's lets you have more freedom in your echo substats. This thing fucking doesn't really do anything. Resistance to interruption. That implies that you're getting hit if you're getting the resistance to interruption. And so it just frankly does seem like an almost useless QOL buff unless you're playing in a manner where you're just like tanking hits for fun. And that would mean that you're playing suboptimally. And if you have a skill issue, if you're constantly getting hit out of these abilities, yeah, it might help. Also, in a lot of ways, actually make you a worse player if you're leveraging this resistance to interruption constantly across your rotations. Next up, we've got our S2. Inflamement increases Changli's crit rate by 25% for 8 seconds. Changli always opens up every single rotation by using something that gives her inflamement. And so what this means is that she gets a massive, massive critical rate buff of 25%. And what this does, the main benefit of this is that you can build a crit damage forecast and use her weapon, which gives critical damage. But you also have to think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. This sequence node is pretty much fucking useless unless you have Changli's signature. And so what this means is that to even use this in the first place, you need to also pull her weapon. Otherwise, you're just going to be sitting at 100% crit rate, going from like 75 to 100%. And like, sure, it'll be a DPS increase, but it's like, you don't need 100% crit rate on any character. So if you get the weapon, it's good. But if you don't get the weapon, it has close to almost no effect. And it also, frankly, requires you to rebuild your echo substats to get use of it. And so because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to put Changli's S1 and S2. I think it'll go in B tier. Because let's think about it this way as well. Her overall performance in teams, it's not going to be improved dramatically. Her damage isn't going to skyrocket to the point where you end up like blowing up content just because you got her S2. At its core, you're going to have like 40% more critical damage. That'll be the difference. You have about 40% more critical damage, and then you're going to be doing 40% more of her damage when you crit, and it's not going to be like a massive increase. Jinhsi's S1 is already better than Changli's S2 at its core, because you're getting an 80% damage bonus just from her S1. And so you're getting a 40% crit damage bonus with all of the strings attached. Don't forget that. You have to get her weapon, and you have to rebuild her echoes. You have all of these strings attached to even leverage this bonus as well. All right, next up, let's put Zhezhi on deck. We're moving on to version 1.2. So, Zhezhi, she's a bit more interesting of a character. Her S1 gives her a massive buff to her resonance energy after casting her third enhanced resonance skill, and then also increases her crit rate by 10% for 27 seconds. In terms of raw stats, this basically means that she can heavily reduce her ER requirements, and she gains 10% crit rate, and has it pretty much every single time. And so what this means is that, well, in terms of like improving quality of life, and just making her easier to build, and also increasing her damage potential, this is a really good sequence node. It's actually one of the best ones because you both need less ER and you need less critical stats. And for all the other sequence nodes that we've seen, it's not really, it's been like one or the other. It hasn't been a combination of both. And especially when you consider something like the Empyrene Anthem set, guess what, guys? You need to crit for that thing to work. And so it makes it even easier for her to work around her best in slot. I mean, in terms of just like what a sequence node is supposed to do, this kind of gets everything done. Next up, the max Inklet Spirits summoned by Resonance Liberation Living Canvas increases by 6. The Inklet Spirits are basically her Resonance Liberation damage, right? She summons up to 21, and with that sequence node, it goes up to 27. And so what this does is it basically increases her coordinated attack damage by a significant amount, and in her best in slot team, or one of her best in slot teams with Jinhsi, it lets her charge up Jinhsi's Forte Circuit a lot more in the same duration of time. And so I'd view it this way. It's an okay damage increase on her main damage type, but it really only does a lot in Jinhsi teams. Sure, you'll get extra damage in a Carlotta team, but like, well, okay, right? Like it's not bad, but it works. It's not as creative as it could be, right? This is going to be very passive. You're not going to notice it. It's going to be something that happens in the background, and you're not really going to be making active gameplay decisions around it. I personally view it as a little bit mid, but it does have synergy, right, with one of her best teammates. And so because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be putting Zhezhi at the top of B. All right, now let's go ahead and move on forward into our next character released in version 1.2. This one's going to be Xiangli Yao. And so this gentleman, everybody got him for free. Or not everybody. Everybody that was playing the game got him for free. And so some people might have some of his nodes. Let's go ahead and check out the first one. Resonance skill Law of Rains additionally launches 6 convolution matrices at enemies, each dealing resonance liberation damage equal to 8% of the skill's damage multiplier. So you might be thinking, oh, it's 6 times 8%, right? That's only like 48%. What Xiangli Yao's S1 does is it will take 48% of this damage, of the initial Law of Rains damage. And obviously, it's going to be a lot less than what we're seeing over here for the cognition model. But guess what? This is still a decent chunk. It's going to be 655%. And 48% of about 655 is going to be like 300 something. We're just spitballing over here. And if it's 300 something and we're casting this ability Law of Rains 3 times, it's like 900%. That's a lot. This is, even with the corrected calculation, one of the strongest S1s in the game. It is unbelievably powerful. And it is definitely, if you're trying to make, him do more damage, while it's not necessary, it's one of the best upgrades you can make in the game. Do you want to check Pride Win for damage calculations, guys? Guys, I know how to read numbers. But if you guys want the proof, I'll show it. Law of Rains 1, 2, 3. And if you want Jinhsi's in comparison, Jinhsi's is a 15%. Xiangli Yao's is basically 14. That's what I meant by it's one of the strongest S1s in the game. It's like 1% behind Jinhsi's. Y'all got that proof? There's the proof for you. So, going back to it, Xiangli Yao's S1, right, is really fucking good. We've established that it's really fucking good. His S2, well, guess what, guys? His S2 just gives him a 30% crit damage boost. And sure, a 30% crit damage isn't as good as Changli's 25% crit rate, but Xiangli Yao's S1 is a lot fucking better than Changli's S1. And so when you combine these two together, I'm going to be honest, Xiangli Yao's S2 is stronger than Jinhsi's S2. Because these actually synergize with each other, and Jinhsi's S2 just doesn't fucking do anything. And so because of this, ladies and gentlemen, right, this is a flat stat upgrade that just works with his previous upgrade. He's S. He might be one of the strongest S2 DPSs in the game. It's better than Jinhsi's S2, because the upgrades actually work together. I know, it's going to be controversial to see a man in S tier above Jinhsi, but remember, this is based off the first 2 dupes. And because a lot of people got him for free, there's a decent chance he could have actually gotten his dupes. But we've done the math. He's worth it. All right, next up, another character, Shorekeeper. Let's be honest here when we're talking about Shorekeeper. Her S1 has basically increased quality of life, where it's a lot harder to not get the effects of it. You have a way bigger range, you have way longer duration, and when you use discernment for the damage, it doesn't end the Stellar Realm. This is the thing though, guys. This only has an actual use case in dual DPS. Because in hypercarry teams, the incremental damage that you're going to get from this is like almost nothing. In optimized hypercarry rotations, there's actually almost no damage buff at all from S1. However, this is one of the best co-op sequence nodes in the game, because guess what? When you're playing support like Shorekeeper, you don't do damage until you use discernment, but using discernment will end the buffs for all your teammates. And so by having your S1, you can actually have fun in the co-op game mode. A wild concept, I know. The reason why this helps dual DPS is the fact that you can actually use discernment without ending the Stellar Realm, and the duration is extended in case you do have an extended dual DPS rotation. However, this is the problem with the duration extension. If you actually leverage the full extended duration of this buff, you won't have Shorekeeper's outro available, because Shorekeeper's outro skill lasts the same amount of time as the Resonance Liberation, 30 seconds. And if your outro buff runs out and you're still trying to use the Stellar Realm, your DPS will tank off a cliff. And so this duration extension is kind of just a bait. If you're actually making use of it, you're playing your team horribly wrong. So her S1, it's quality of life, but there's no damage buff at all outside of dual DPS. It's okay. Her S2, though, is kind of where stuff gets a little bit crazy. She now grants a 40% damage buff to the entire team. And I'll be honest, 40% attack is a lot. And with this S2 active, especially in the previously mentioned dual DPS team comps, this makes them deal a lot of fucking damage. 40% attack is basically equivalent to 4 really high level attack substats. And guess what, guys? 4 attack substats is really hard to get. And if you already have 4 attack substats and you get this as well on top of it, now you have an 80% attack bonus. I mean, that's a big fucking number. And if you're a character that has a lot of built-in damage buffs, you have things like Xiangli Yao's S1s, you have something like Jinhsi's S1 as well. guess what? Your damage is going to skyrocket off of a cliff from getting this, and it's extremely powerful. But you also have to think about it this way. It's also versatile because a lot of best-in-slot team comps will use Shorekeeper. And if you're thinking about it from terms of value across as many teams possible, well, I think Shorekeeper's S2 probably has to go into the S tier because, well, Shorekeeper has the most team comps in the game. And so her S2 has the potential to benefit the most teams in the game. While, you know, a sequence node for an individual carry, like Xiangli Yao or Jinhsi, only works in their teams. So in terms of versatility and overall strength to your account, Shorekeeper's S2 is probably going to take the cake. All right, our next character up is going to be Camellya. And Camellya's got some very interesting sequence nodes. And I would say that starting from Xiangli Yao, this is when sequence nodes started getting a lot stronger. First sequence node, she gains a buff, right? That increases her crit damage by 28% when she uses her intro skill, which is great. And then she also gains immunity to interruptions while using Ephemeral, her most damaging move. And so this is like quality of life and a shit ton of damage. When you compare this to bullshit garbage like Changli, it's kind of clear which one's better. It's kind of clear which S1 is better. When you look at this and then you compare it to Changli, this is trash. This is so much better. It's so much better, it's insane. So we covered her S1. Now let's look at her S2. And ladies and gentlemen, this S2 is actually insane. It straight up just increases the damage multiplier of her Ephemeral by 120%. This doesn't mean that the damage done is increased by 120%. No. This means that this thing, you multiply this by 220% to get the whole damage. And you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen? This turns from 1.2k to like 2.6, maybe? 2.7k scaling? And your Ephemeral ends up doing at full build maybe like 500 to 600k damage in a massive AoE. It's frankly a little bit disgusting. And it turns TOA clears with this character into a complete joke. It turns holograms with this character into a complete joke. I could honestly say, sometimes it feels a little bit too strong, because you'll use it and just completely annihilate a boss's entire HP bar. And it's ridiculously powerful. And so because of that, right, I think it's pretty clear what argument I've made here. It goes into S above Xiangli Yao. I would stay from a versatility perspective, obviously it only works in the Camellya teams, and so I'm just going to put it below Shorekeeper, because this can be used in more teams. All right, we've covered Camellya. Now let's move on to the 2.0 units, starting off with Carlotta. And so, don't freak out, okay? I have Carlotta's S1 and S2. So let's talk a little bit about them. So, Carlotta's S1 basically increases her crit rate across 90% of her rotation by 12.5%. This is basically one of the nicer sequence nodes because this has a similar effect to Changli's. It's Changli's S2 but on a smaller scale, where it lets you basically run a crit damage forecast and still have a pretty decent critical rate. It also has a secondary effect where you'll restore 30 additional points on her Forte circuit when you use the second part of her Resonance skill. But what you'll find is that across her optimal rotations, you don't actually gain any benefit from this. This is like a quote-unquote, I like to call it like a noob trap, where if you're actually making use of this in Carlotta's hypercarry rotations, you're playing her wrong. That's kind of it. If you're playing her optimally, you never actually use this fucking thing in the first place. Pretty much ever. So it's kind of like a bait. It might have some use in dual DPS, but if you're playing Carlotta in dual DPS, I guess you're just trying to have fun anyways. So it doesn't really matter. It's good in the overworld though. Next up, we have Carlotta's S2. I'm going to be repeating a lot of the same words that I used for Camellya. They also have similar names. Carlotta's S2 increases the damage multiplier of the final shot of her liberation by 126%. Let's take a look at how much that final shot deals. It deals 644.33%. Doesn't look like a lot, but she already gains a damage multiplier bonus of 80% from her Forte circuit. So this ends up becoming like, let's be honest, at full build with good substats, this ends up becoming like a 600k nuke with her S2. It ranges between 400 to like 700k depending on your investment with Carlotta's S2, and it's really strong. And Carlotta casts her liberation a lot. She uses it every single rotation. This ends up trivializing, right, a lot of the things that she needs to do in combat. It does less damage than Camellya's Ephemeral, but you have to think about it this way, guys. Carlotta's liberation has a lower cooldown than Camellya's Ephemeral. Carlotta can use her liberation a lot more than Camellya's Ephemeral. And so in overall clears, Carlotta is just faster with her S2 because she can use it more. But guess what, guys? It's about just as strong. I would say, I'm not exactly sure. I would kind of put them in the same spot because they have similarly large, massive AoEs. Carlotta does less damage with the upgrade, but she can cast it more frequently. Camellya does more damage, but can't cast it as often. And so, I guess this is the thing, right? Which one's better? I don't know. I would rank them in the same spot, but I would just put Carlotta ahead because she's newer. That's it. They're basically the same. The best DPS S2s in the game. Let's think about it that way. So yeah, I'm putting them in the same spot. So now we'll move on to the last character on the tier list for today. And again, we're going by S2s. It's going to be Mamma Mia, Roccia. So Roccia's S1 is going to give her 100 additional imagination and 10 concerto energy and give her immune to interruption when using her bounces. I'm gonna be honest, guys. Getting hit during Roccia's bounces is one of the most annoying fucking things in the game. It's almost like the character should have had interruption immunity built into her kit instead of it being on a sequence node. I'm going to be fucking honest. Because she needs to use those bounces to do anything in her kit, regenerate energy, and it should have been built in. I'm being honest. It is so easy for her to get hit out of those bounces and just become completely fucking useless. Because A, you have to like go back into the air, and this is the killer part about her bounces. Each one generates incrementally more concerto energy and deals more damage. Her third bounce generates 25. Her first generates 10. And if you get hit out of the air by just one of them, you have to start back from stage 1. And so it just completely butchers her entire fucking rotation and your concerto energy if you get hit out of these. And unfortunately, I kind of view this as like design the problem, sell the solution. I really don't like this sequence node because A, it's like, okay, now you don't have to do a basic attack after her intro skill and you gain 10 additional energy. But then it's like, this should have been in the baseline kit. And so because of that, I have to rank this kind of high because it feels really good to have this, but it should have been in the baseline kit. It's more of like an insult to like the character's design versus the sequence node. So it's good. Faster rotations and less need to obviously restart the entire fucking tower clear because your rotation got fucked up. And that happens really often when using this character. I don't like Roccia. S2. Casting basic attack Real Fantasy grants all resonators in the team 10% havoc damage bonus for 30 seconds. And when it fully stacks up, you gain an additional 10%. That means it is a 40% havoc damage buff after doing her 3 bounces. And you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen? That's really fucking high. That's a massive fucking bonus. It is so high that it will just turn your havoc teams into absolute powerhouses. The problem is, it's not like Shorekeeper's S2, because only like 2 fucking teams in the game can use it. Only like 2 teams in the goddamn game can use this. Camellya and Havoc Rover, and then like maybe Danjin. So like, it's okay. It's gonna make those teams really good. But you know what's gonna be better for a Camellya team than Roccia's S2? Getting Camellya's S2. Camellya's S2 is going to make that team do more damage than Roccia's S2. That's kind of just how it is. And so, if you're thinking, oh, you know, I'll think of it as like an investment for any future Havoc character, you'd be right. This would turn Roccia into the best general Havoc buffer for probably a really, really long time. But guess what? It might be a better idea to just pick it up on a rerun when you know that there are going to be more Havoc characters in the first place that can use it. Investing in a character is like, in my opinion, one of the worst things you can do in a gacha game because you don't know when the characters are going to be coming out and you don't know what the synergies are actually going to be like. And there's always a chance that you'll like think that this is a good investment and then it just doesn't actually pan out and turn into anything good. That's also a possibility too. So you could just wait for the rerun of the character and then pull the nodes then when you actually know that it's going to do something versus banking on it doing something in the future. Think about all the people in Honkai Star Rail that pulled S2 Sparkle. Yeah, I bet you guys feel real fucking stupid now. Let's be honest. I would say, think about the active use cases in the game and pull based off of that. And Roccia's S2 doesn't have a lot of active use cases. However, I do have to recognize the overall power. And so I'll put Roccia at the top of A. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have covered basically every single S1 and every single S2 in the game. And what you've probably noticed is that some characters, right, specifically the DPS ones, starting from Xiangli Yao, their sequence nodes got a lot fucking stronger. Starting from this guy and then going on to Camellya and then Carlotta, the DPS sequence nodes got a lot better, especially in comparison, right, to the absolute garbage that we saw on Jiyan and the absolute horror that Jinhsi's S2 is. Obviously, as you get more into like S3, S4, S5, and S6, they start kind of like balancing back in terms of the power levels. But hey, we're talking about the stuff that a free-to-play player can actually reasonably get from the shop by simply saving up their corals. And so because of that, these are what the rankings are looking like. I know that Jinhsi isn't S, but guys, we're going it up to S2, and her S2 is one of the worst fucking things in the game, let's be honest. So with that, let me know what you all think. I think that this is a pretty accurate ranking based off of overall power level to your account that these provide, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.